Hey students, and welcome to the CREEK midWEEK Student Podcast, where we help you become more like Jesus. I'm your host, Pastor Tomy, and today I'm joined with one of our student residents, Ethan, as we unpack his sermon that he gave tonight in our Beauty for Ashes series. We're going to talk a little bit about covenants. We're going to be talking about how even when the math isn't mathing, that God still pursues his people. So let's dive right in. Well, Ethan, thanks for joining us, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a long week of relaxing and resting from Thanksgiving. It was well needed.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. That's kind of probably a tough assignment, a tough draw to get of like, I'm preaching the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Did you feel like you had the adequate time that you needed? Seemed like you were super well prepared, certainly.
Yeah, no, for sure. I had put in quite a bit of thought beforehand. Like, this was a couple months worth of thought. And honestly, in school, this is pretty much what I thought about all day. So it had been well prepared, at least in my mind, for before I started to sit down and write it.
Well, it's your first time on the podcast. Do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let them know, what you do here at the church, and then just, you mentioned your degree, and so maybe talk about that a little bit. Just give us a little glimpse of who's Ethan.
Yeah. I got married back in July. My wife and I went to a church in Parker, and then we went back to school together. I ended up getting my undergraduate in Christian ministry with an emphasis in biblical studies at Grand Canyon. And then I was in what was called the Barnabas program. So I did like a little bit of a fast track. So I'm about a quarter of the way through my MDiv and looking to go back here, hopefully in the next year or two, to continue that education.
Yeah. Tell for the students, what's an MDiv?
Yeah, a master's in divinity. So basically I would be continuing work in theology to become a pastor eventually. Yeah.
So you like talking theology.
I love talking theology.
We have this in common. This should be fun for sure.
Be.
Hey, great job on your sermon tonight, for sure. You are week 3 of our series, Beauty for Ashes. You did a great job kind of recapping, catching us up to this point. And then just for people kind of midweek at this point, give us just the high level overview, just a quick reminder of kind of what was the main key thing that you hit on tonight.
The Lord's desire to dwell with his creation was never the plan B. A lot of times we think that like, because we sinned, God had to send his son to dwell with us as kind of like a second option. But in reality, if we're reading the grand arc of the Bible, it's the whole story. It's God desiring to dwell with his people. There's a book called God, the ancient story of God with us, and it sets up this idea that God has always been in pursuit of man and wanting to dwell with him, and that's been an extremely transformative thought, at least in my life as well.
It comes so perfectly too after we talked about Revelation in our last series here, and hitting on the fact that like at the end of all things, when the New Jerusalem comes down, heaven and earth become one, and God is with his people, that there's no temple because there's no need for a temple. You don't have to go anywhere to find God. He's there with his people everywhere, always now. And but we see that all the way back from the garden as well, is that he was walking amongst his people. And then even though, you're right, we sinned, we messed it up, and there became this separation because of that sin. And yet I love you kind of took us through every step along the way of how God continued to dwell amongst his people in the tabernacle, this traveling tent that represented his presence, and then the Ark of the Covenant, and then with ultimately the temple and the Holy of Holies within that temple, and like every step of the way, it's like, God is right here. And then ultimately Jesus comes, and it's like, truly now, Emmanuel, God is with us. We have seen God in the flesh. And so for students, knowing that we live in this era now of Emmanuel, God is with us, and then not only that, but post-Pentecost, we now have the Holy Spirit. What does that mean for us today, for our students to know, hey, truly God is with them always?
I encourage students to come back next week to really hear just this ancient story coming to culmination in Christ coming down and being born in the manger, finding us at the lowest place. Like, he was born literally in a barn. Like, this is the ancient culmination of God's plan and desire to dwell with us. And so I think for students, it's something to keep in mind of the fact that the entire storyline of the Bible, people who have done things virtually unforgivable in our minds, God yet still came down and desired and chased them time after time from running away. There's just this beauty in that. And even David talked about it last week, just like the further we get brought into our sin, but yet God met us there. He met us in the dirt, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is incredible to think of the lengths that God was willing to go to truly show, no, my place is among my people, and I'm working to redeem them for sure. I love the conversation from that you talked about how, because of God's presence with his people all throughout the Old Testament, what that was meant to be as a representation of his people for everyone else, right? Of like, just use this language of kingdom of priests, the holy nation, and that they never quite really lived that out the way that they were supposed to, right? But maybe give us a glimpse of what do you think it would have looked like if they had actually lived as a kingdom of priests the way God had called them to. They had God's presence with them. They were to be the presence of God to others. What might that actually have looked like if they'd gotten it right?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it. I guess, I mean, if they were, in an ideal world, if they would have lived that out, I suppose that would have been a lot like what the Church of Christ looks like now. Like, God was dwelling with them in the tent, and he was coming to them through specific people, the Levites. But if they were to have been doing that properly, it would have been almost a evangelical outpush of like, they were to be creating more, not ethnically Jew, but like religiously Jewish people. And the inclusion of Israel in that would have been a lot like, I think, what we would look like now. In that we're inviting people in, and we're saying there's something so much better, like the ancient God who created you desires to walk with you.
That's so good. I think, there's pockets where you see this done so well today, of like what the church is intended to be. I think if we're not careful, we can slip into that same kind of mindset though, right? Like, again, there's supposed to be this kingdom of priests. I'm a pastor. We don't use the language priest, but if it was, the same kind of language, or like a kingdom of pastors, of shepherds.
Sure. Yeah.
I truly, my role only exists because I have been given a flock to shepherd. My role only exists because I'm supposed to pastor others. If it was just me sitting in my own holiness, that's not a thing. Like, that's not what God ever desired, right? As for you, as you continue to study and move towards that, like, that's not why we are called into this, right? It's so that we can be the hands and feet of Jesus, so that we can shepherd others, so that we can help them to grow in their faith. And yet, so often, I think in the Old Testament, we see it over and over again. And again, I think the church today can fall into the same trap. They kind of positioned themselves as like against the people around them, rather than like, no, we are here to serve and love them into the kingdom in some respect. And again, I think today we can have that same mindset of like, it's us versus the culture around us. And sure, we are called to be set apart, to live in a very different way. Again, a holy nation, be holy means to be set apart, right? And yet if we miss it, we similarly can maybe start to just set ourselves against the culture around us. How can that serve as a reminder for us here today of like, hey, let's not slip into that same kind of mindset that they did too often?
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately when we look at culture, there's this idea of that us as the church we're supposed to look so much different than culture in the world. But to your point, I think that there's a lot of areas where the church hasn't looked all that different from the world in a lot of areas. And so I think if we're living as a kingdom of priests, desiring to love those for the truth that could be so good in their life, I think that changes our mindset from me being against you if we have differing opinions, rather than I love you too much to let you live
Mm,
in what is untrue for you, and untrue in reality. And I think that minor tweak in our thinking can help prevent us from
mm,
becoming like those who were the Pharisees, who were,
yeah.
I'm holier than you, so I can't sit with you. But like Jesus did, he sat with the sinners and the tax collectors, and he broke bread with them, and he loved them too much to let them sit in their fill.
That's good.
Yeah.
Man, imagine if we lived like that, right?
Right.
I mean, it makes me think as you're talking of the parable of the Good Samaritan, right?
Yeah.
Of like a man is beaten, he's left for dead on the side of the road, and then a couple of religious people walk by,
Right.
and yet according to their religious customs, they had every reason to walk by, right? Like they were
Yeah.
not allowed to touch
Right.
blood, and so it's like I would have had to go through this ceremonial cleansing process, but it was them, I think, maybe like elevating the religious rites over the ability to serve someone. And I think that meant I hadn't thought of that particular parable in those terms.
Mhm.
And yet I think that's what we can tend to do. If sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to get dirty in those ways. I'm supposed to be set apart. And yet we miss the forest for the trees and like don't give ourselves the opportunity to serve people
Right.
too and to show up as the hands and feet of Jesus. Hmm.
Yeah. I've got a tattoo. I went to Turkey for my senior trip, and I've got a
Mm.
tattoo of like a one of the first churches that is in the courtyard to Diana.
Hmm.
Um, and in that form of worship, they would harm themselves. They would cut themselves and
Wow.
maim themselves to worship Diana, this sort of god of, I believe it was fertility.
Hmm.
But yet the church was planted in the courtyard to this temple.
Wow.
And it's like this constant reminder of us to be thinking about Jesus met us in the dirty place.
Mm.
So how are we meeting those who are far from God in the
Wow.
dirty place?
That's a powerful image to think of. Like, yeah, it's hard to imagine something worse than like, hey, we're going to go worship by cutting ourselves and like these really terrible things. And yet it's like, hey, we're going to get as close to that as we can. Not because we're participating and like
Right.
letting that
Yeah.
change who we are, but because it's like, we need that proximity. We need the
Yeah.
closeness if we're going to reach people
Right.
from that. And that's powerful. One of the other things that you talked about that I really loved was this conversation surrounding covenants. And we talk to our seniors about this every year. The idea that a covenant was literally sealed in blood, like these animals that were spread apart. And you and then they would walk through saying, as you said tonight, that, hey, if I break this covenant, may it be done to me as it is to these animals.
Yeah.
That like, this is how serious the promise is that we are making to each other. You kind of teased a little bit to the students of like, hey, there's a little bit more to this conversation that you were wanting to have. So take us there. Where do you want to go with this?
Yeah, I was sitting there at the table, and I came into the creative office and was bouncing ideas off of people in here, and all of a sudden this thought just sparked. I was like,
Mm,
wait a minute. What if, because God walked through the animals saying, let me become as these animals if I break covenant with you, although he wasn't the one who broke covenant,
yeah.
the perfect covenant keeper took on humanity's part. Like,
Mm,
he came down and he bled and he became like the animals
mm,
because we broke covenant with him. And there, like, my imagination lit up, and I started thinking about all these little pathways of like, it wasn't even the same covenant. Like that covenant didn't need to be fulfilled. It had been fulfilled in him coming down, but yet it was as if he was desiring to be so faithful to his
mm,
people in covenant that he did so anyways,
yeah.
by becoming as the animals, by dying and raising again in 3 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting to think that, yeah, God established this covenant with his people, and they over and over again in the Old Testament just broke the covenant. They broke the covenant. They never, hardly ever, there are there glimpses where it's like, oh, they were kind of doing a pretty good job of keeping that covenant. It was like constantly they were breaking the covenant. And yet God in his faithfulness kept his side of the covenant even still. Because this is super nerdy. We got into this with our seniors. This kind of covenant is called a bilateral suzerainty covenant. The only reason that matters is because it's a type of covenant that exists between two unequal parties. And so God, obviously, we're not equal to God in
Right.
power and stature and anything. Um, and so it was very clearly a covenant that was being made between two unequal parties. And usually the covenant was made, the bilateral suzerainty covenant was made so that the party of greater power could not kind of weasel out of their end of it.
Yeah.
But in this instance, it's like, no, the lesser party broke covenant over and over and over again, and yet the more powerful one kept his side of things anyway. And I love that thought of like, yeah, in order to continue to keep that, I'm gonna go even a step further.
Yeah.
And as Jesus says, I'm establishing a new covenant in my blood. It's still kind of this hearkening back to the old covenant of like, hey, you guys got this wrong, but look, I'm still going to do this, and I'm still going to be broken for you in the way that those animals were. It's a really great thought. I've never had that thought before. I think it's worth maybe exploring a little bit for students too of in this new covenant that Jesus established, that again was not this bilateral suzerainty covenant. The other thing about that kind of covenant is that it's an if-then covenant.
Yeah.
If you keep your part, then I will be forced to keep my part, essentially. But that's not the kind of covenant that Jesus made. He made a covenant that's like, nope, I'm going to take it all on for you. All you have to do is just accept it. What does that mean for us today that we get to live under a new covenant in Jesus's blood?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think it means a lot like, we got into today about how God desired to dwell in the midst of his people. And when we're specifically talking about the Israelites, it was the sanctuary, it was the tabernacle that he dwelled with them in. But like I got into tonight, we talked about how God said later that I do not leave you as orphans, but I send an advocate in my place. And this advocate actually will be better for you. Like now we are the very tabernacle. We are the very sanctuary walking amongst the people. Like that's the big mind switch for us, is that as we walk through life, we walk as though we are the sanctuary. In I believe it's in Romans, it talks about how we are a fragrance of goodness.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this story. There's a apostle of Paul. It was his like apprentice. His name was Polycarp. And when he died, they staked him to the ground and they burned him. And they said that as he burned, he smelled of wine and bread. This idea of like, he was so encompassed in the presence of the Lord that one of the very like important pieces, like one of the signs of Christ's new covenant was the wine and the bread that he gave to his disciples, that he was so immersed in that he actually became the fragrance to those who were killing him. Like that's an unthinkable thing for us. But I think that there's something so unique for students to be able to walk through life and have the person across from them say, you know what, there's something different about you.
Yeah.
Like we are to be living in that way where we're an essential fragrance to the world. We're the perfume that covers up the stink. And that we're spreading our goodness. It's like the skunk oil that it smells, but in the old days they used to use skunk oil to make perfumes. They would extract the bad smells and put the good smells in, and as you rub across things, you can't help but make other things smell beautiful.
Wow. It's a powerful image for sure. It's incredible to think that in the midst of all of this, like this is how God pursues his people despite our brokenness, despite, again, the fact that we break covenant constantly.
Right.
And yet he's like, it's okay, just get back up, just keep walking towards me. And I think it's a beautiful picture of, again, the people of God collectively, the Israelites literally carried the presence of God with them, or a representation of the presence of God with them everywhere that they went. Collectively, now we individually have that opportunity to do that as we are that tabernacle. We are that Ark of the Covenant, essentially. And again, no matter how often we might mess up, he continues to say, no, but I still want to dwell with my people. I still want to dwell in you. Now, that's not who you are, so don't live that. Don't those simple things, you got to get those things over to me. But Well, Ethan, thanks for giving us this incredible picture of what this means for us in the midst of this Beauty for Ashes series. And I'm excited to see as we get the chance to wrap it up over the next couple of weeks what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a blessing and an honor.
Well, that's all for us here at the Creek midweek. We can't wait to see you back here again soon. But before we go, a blessing. Students, may you live with an understanding that you are the very temple of the Holy Spirit. May we live up to this calling that the Israelites struggled to do for so often of living like a kingdom of priests. May you live with a mindset of being able to serve and love the people around you well, so that God can help his kingdom to come in you and through you until it is in Castle Rock as it is in heaven. Amen. We can't wait to see you back here again soon.